If you're feeling tired, I can understand. Yeah, so speaking of contributions, this is my latest Angular contribution after maintaining this compatibility table for 4.5 years in a gist. Now it's finally part of the official Angular IO documentation. So this is great resource for maintainers. I created it before because I needed it, and now everyone can benefit. If you've been following this gist, it's structured in a very similar way, but now we have the current actively maintained versions up here. And we also managed to get in all the historical versions for historical reference and the poor souls out there on Angular 7 still, even going back to Angular 2 down here. So if you're switching between versions of Angular, or you're just coming back to an old repo and, oh, it's Angular whatever version, so which version of Node did I use back then? I have no idea. Well, you're in luck. Now it's on angular.io/guide/versions, or search for version compatibility in the search field. Great. So yeah, I didn't plan to come here, so it's kind of choose your own adventure. These are my main OSS steady contributions. So I'm part of the RX Angular team. We do performance and DX improvements for Angular, like Michael Latke's show off application of the movies app that's based on RX Angular and other good magic stuff. So RX Angular is the open source effort by Michael Latke, Push-Based, and a lot of other people from that company. And I've contributed mostly the documentation. So rxangular.io. But I also maintain these other packages as part of the NG Workers team. And last time here at Angular TinyConf, I talked a little about Spectacular and a lot about the differences between end-to-end testing and component unit testing. Lumberjack is also an interesting one. It's a plugin-based logging library specifically for Angular. So you can add your own drivers for whatever logging provider you have on the backend. We recommend a declarative API that we have, but there's also an imperative API. But today, Adi wanted me to present Router Component Store. I've been working on it for a while. I haven't presented it in public before or even talked about it, so let's get straight into it. So as the name suggests, it's based on the NGRX component store, but you don't really need to use the NGRX component store yourself. It's an Angular data service that has some observables, and it uses component store behind the scenes, so it is a peer dependency. So you will have to install it for this package to work. But other than that, it's just Angular and RxJS and TypeScript. It's published with partial IB compilation. I don't even remember the latest version right now. It's still probably in a pre-release version, but it does. I think it supports latest versions of Angular, right? Let's have a look. Yeah, Angular 15. So I'll have to roll a new version when 16 comes out. But I'm actually looking to make it stable soon. It's been in this pre-release version for a while. I released the first version a year and a half ago, but it's been used in productions for a while. So this is the full API of the service you get. You get a router store, that's the interface. And there's two different ways to provide it. There's provided as a global router store or local router store. The global router store is a global root level service. So if you just want to get going quickly, you can just use the provided global router store function. Or if you want to tie it to a component, you can use the provide local router store, and it will follow the life cycle of your component. So if you only need it in a few components, maybe you use the local router store there, but you'll be injecting the same class, and they both have precisely the same API. There's a few differences between them. Like the global one can be injected into any class, but the local one can be injected in a directive, a component, a pipe, or any component level service, but not in root level services, for example. So slight differences. This is an example of what the local one would look like. You have your component, and in the component providers, you will call this provide local router store. Please tell me if the font is too small, and I'll zoom in even more. Then you would inject it, this router store, also from the ng worker router component store package. And now, instead of going through activated route service by Angular, you can do router store.select route param ID, for example. So this is just a basic API, but let's actually try installing it in an Angular application from scratch. So I just created this stack blitz and added in a feature from one of the Angular tutorials, the router tutorial. It's called the crisis sensor. I dropped it in, and now where are the dependencies when we are zoomed in this much? They're gone, or yeah, refresh maybe. There they are. Okay, so we'll add another one. Let's add ng worker /router-component -store. And now it'll tell me, well, you also need the nginx component store, and that's the only thing you have to do. Install that yourself or let your tooling take care of it. You don't have to use the component store yourself. It's just an internal dependency of this router component store. And if you do use the nginx component store, well, then you have reused this dependency, and the bundle size will be even, the cost of introducing this library will be even smaller, even though it's already a pretty small library with just one service. Okay, so now it should be installed. Let's get into some of these router components. So, for example, if you click on one of these thingies, it says the ID is 1, and that's because you've routed to the /1 route. So let's see if we can find that component. It's this one, has the route path ID, crisis detail component. Let's go into that one and see how it's implemented. So it's using this activated route, which is used here, route data subscribe, and then kind of not like what do you say, imperative, assigning variables or properties and variables. So let's try to convert this to router component store instead to see what that looks like. I'll zoom in one more time. So we'll import from ng worker router component store. And first thing is we need this provide, and there's 2 of them. Let's go with the local one. So we'll add component providers, all view providers, that works as well. And just call the function, no options. So now that we've done that, we can inject this service that's called router store. So let's add that here, router store, inject router store, and we need inject from Angular. And so let's try getting rid of this activated route service and see what happens in this code. So route data subscribe. So we were already subscribing to an observable. So how could we get that from the router store? Well, it was a route parameter. So we'll use this selector factory select route param, and it was, sorry, this is route data. Okay. Really? Okay, so it's passed through a router solver. Okay, well, we also have observables for route data. We need a key, so that would be the crisis. And let's drop that in here and say, this is the crisis. See, the type is happy, crisis or undefined. Yeah. Well, we could say if there's no crisis, we'll just return. We have strong types, so we do have to take care of undefined, because if there is no route data, you'll get an undefined, so you have to handle that yourself somehow. But now, let's see, route. So there's one more place that uses this route service. Oh, okay. For this relative navigation, we still need the activated route service. The router component store is about data from the router. So let's get that activated route back for that purpose. Let's see if the application runs. Yeah, there we go. So still working. Nice. So that's adding a basic feature. Let's have a look at the other, just for fun. We have the current route. We have the route fragment, query parameters, all of them, all the route data, all the route parameters, or we can select a specific query parameter by saying I wanted the filter query parameter. You could subscribe to that, for example. What do we have other than that? We have, you can select router events as well. And I think, how did I create this? This is a new one. So we could say we want navigation end events. So we could pass that in and subscribe to navigation end events. So it's just a convenience API. It's a little setup. And let's try one last thing here. Let's try adding the global provider instead. So I'll remove this one and the application will break because now the service is not provided anymore. But we will add it at the root level, so in our main TS here. So look for the global provider factory, add it to our global providers right here, and the application should be working again. There we go. That's what I wanted to show you. Adi, you can come back, and if anyone has questions, feedback, let me know.
Of course, of course. So let me make sure we are there, and I'm gonna get my guys back in here.
Hey,
Oh man, this looks
this is
awesome, man.
awesome.
This looks very awesome, man. When you
Yeah,
say
that
it's
looks
not out
really
yet?
cool.
When I mean, how long have you been working on this?
I created it a year and a half ago because
Yeah,
you
yeah.
always need those route parameters and stuff.
Absolutely.
And it's, of course, it's based on the NGRX router store, but that uses the traditional global store. I wanted to have a smaller footprint
Hmm.
and not have all that set up from NGRX global store. So I based it on the router component store instead. And the brilliant thing is you would never know if you didn't have to install that as a dependency. It's just observables, how it implements. Well, that's the component store here is an implementation detail, so you can use it even if you're not using component store yourself. It's just
Mm-hmm.
a dependency, a sub-dependency of this package.
And thanks to Jason, I'm very big on component store these days, and this is going to be a great addition because, I mean, it reads so easy. I mean, I you can just look at it and it reads pretty easy, and then the API it exposes. I think like because part of like being imperative versus declarative is always about like the verbosity of like your template and where those subscription are they going to happen implicitly or explicitly, and I think this can allow you to take care of that in a very eloquent way. Yeah.
I think there's a great question here from Edition Addict saying any anticipated changes with Angular 16 and route inputs. He said, I assume this still does more.
Yeah, that's a very nice addition to Angular 16. So you can bind route parameters to the input properties of components. That's great. So you'll get unwrapped values, not observables. But if you want to work with observables, for example, if you are using component store yourself, well, this ties in beautifully. Or if you just like to work with observables for other things or in the template or whatever, then you have everything in the observables here, and it's as performant as I could possibly make it. So yeah, but no, it's I guess at this point it's an alternative, and as we saw before, you can do the same things with the activated route, but it's just not as convenient to use.
Absolutely. The NGRX router store hooks into a lot of events. Does the component router store also hook into and provide information about those events?
Yes, so in the background, it will, I mean, the local version, it builds on top of the activated route that's provided for every router component. And the globally provided version will hook into the router's events for all the observables. The local one will also use the router for a few of these observables. So yeah, the global one in particular, it subscribes to the navigation start and end. I've been doing a lot of analysis on how does it work, the navigation events, and there's been some changes lately. Reversed engineer what was going on in the NGX components or the NGX router store, and initially I did a full-on straight-on port to component store, but it wasn't pretty, so I cleaned up the code instead, and I think it's nice that you can always inject the same router store class, and depending on the provider, it'll provide you a different implementation, but with the same API. So you would never know that behind the scenes there are two different classes provided for the same symbol.
That's cool.
So if you switch from the global provider to the local provider, you won't feel a difference at all.
That's awesome.
Yeah, man, that is pretty cool. And then just like since we are covering all level of Angular, when we say global versus local, that is like at what point in the tree it's provided? Is it provided in root, or is it provided like in a local context? Correct?
Yeah. So the global one you would provide, for example, in the Bootstrap application function providers, or even in your app modules providers metadata. So that's the root level of your application. That's the global scope, shared between many features and so on. But the local scope, yeah, sure, it's a component here. So yeah, it makes sense. The cool thing about one of the cool things about the NGRX component store is that it's not only for local UI state or component specific state. You can even make shared state as this in practice is, like it shares the router state, not just the data for the local route. So yeah, that's especially because of the naming, right? It's the component store. So it should hold
I had that trick me before, but it's more contextual. It's more contextual, yes.
Yes,
if you provide it in context, root, yes.
It's
global. It's a global thing, yeah.
If you provide it in one component and share it between its child components,
it's the child components.
It's also kind of a shared state at that point.
Have you used
it? It's a universal tool. I use it for everything. I fully replaced NGRX store and effects with component store.
That's awesome. Well, no, I was going to say, have you used it at the route level provider? Right, we got route level providers recently in Angular. Have you ever had an instance where you've used it at a route level?
Yeah, you could do the local one there as well. I guess you could try the global one. I won't guarantee that it works. It should really be at the root level.
Yeah.
But the local one you can provide in the standalone routes as well, and it'll be shared for that feature. But then it will never be destroyed. Like this is also for performance. That's one of the other reasons for having the local one. It'll be initialized with the component, but it will also be destroyed when the component is deactivated. So if you only need it in a few places, the local one is the best one. It's the most performant one. because it ties into the life cycle of a component, whereas the global one, or if you provide one on the standalone route providers, it will never be destroyed. So there might be some side effects that you forget about, and you'll have memory leaks and nasty side effects and so on.
That's a fair call out. Yeah, that was actually something that I learned very recently. I honestly thought that when the route deactivated, it would deactivate the providers, but they live forever.
Yeah, they are like module injectors,
Mm-hmm.
which are now environment injectors, right? They are environment injectors.
Yep, environment injectors. Yeah.
Cool. What is next for this? I mean, what are the future? I mean, what are the things that you see in 16 that you will adapt for this to make it evolve into the next iteration?
For this package, I mean, other than just upgrading for every major version of Angular and NGRX, something I've been working on is a router history store.
Ooh.
So that initially you'll get like the current URL, the previous URL, so you can use that for some logic. But I'm trying to see how I can, because I built a very nice history of all router events combined, like the start and the end, so that if you wanted to access that in an easy way, I hope I can do that through the router history store as well. But it'll be in a sub package maybe. So router component store / history, or maybe just in the primary entry points. And if you don't import it, it'll be tree shaped.
That'll be awesome. And then,
but in a separate class, definitely.
Are you going?
That's another really tricky problem. That, for example, if you want to create a back button, if you've tried that, like you have to, you're in a browser, but it's full screen on an iPad or whatever, or an embedded web view. You have to create that back button yourself, and doing that with the router from Angular is tricky. There's lots of footguns.
Right. Well, yeah, I'm actually dealing with something like that right now, so I'm really excited to see this package, because there's other stuff that people will throw metadata onto the history too, and so navigating back through history, you may be able to get the route, but are you going to get the same metadata and stuff that they'd also added? So I'm excited to see that package is exciting to me.
Cool. So